in Ois Dalad, the Maimer on page S, line 17. So we were trying to figure out what is the, since we're saying that the Yidden are now doing what they began to do by Matan Torah. So in other words, we need to figure out what's the Chiddush now by Matan Torah over what was taking place before Matan Torah. There was the Torah before the way it was al Paim Shana Kadma Torah Loyal. There was the Torah the way it was in the times of Avram Avinu, that not just is it Kadma Lo'olam, but now it's also in a way of action because he had a kiyum of it. So therefore, what's the chiddush of Matan Torah? The Rebbe is going to continue in the Maimer is Daled Acheinyan. The idea behind this is after Kim Avram Avinu's called Torah Kula. Though Avram Avinu fulfilled the entire Torah, the Kol Makom still in all. Kol Zahayirak Mitzad Avraham. This was all from the perspective of Avram. To who Kiyam Asat Torah, that he fulfilled the Torah. Abadaim Layoda Torah, Ba'ofen Shah Olam Yeroy Lekablos HaTorah. The Torah still did not descend in such a way that the world should be ready to receive the Torah. That's the reason that the forefathers were distinct and different in their avodah, meaning that each one had a distinct and different avodah than the others. It's because it didn't come down into our world. The avodas Avram from the Halach Goimer says that avodas Avram was in the way that he was traveling, going and traveling, and it says he came Hanegba to the south. The south is the level of Ava, like he's going to mention soon about the level of Avodah Avram, because when you're facing Mizrach, the south is on the right and the north is on the left. So therefore, according to Kabbalah and Chassidus, the south, which is on the right, is associated with the right line with Ava, and the north is associated with Gevurah, with Yira. Avodah Yitzchak was with digging up wells. Avodas Yaakov and Avodah Yaakov is the Inyanat film idea Maklois at top of page Yud. It was through the idea of it was with film that through the carving out of the sticks that he put in front of the animals. So he was accomplishing with that the same thing that we accomplish now with film. So that was all. Each one had their own avodah, their own distinct thing. Avraham Avinu did not do the maklis. Yitzchak did not travel towards the south, and Yaakov did not dig wells. As opposed to afterwards, when the Torah came down below 10 handbreadths in the physical world, the Torah, then it's in such a way that it's one Torah for all of us. All of us have the same Torah. All of us put on film. All of us have the different mitzvahs that the Avos fulfilled through their particular unique type of ways of doing things. Inyan Shakim Avos called Torah Kulachal Nitna, the fact that the Avos fulfilled the entire Torah until or before it wasn't given. It was by each one according to the root of his neshama. Avram Avram was in the line of kindness. He traveled and he went and he traveled to the south. Like we said before, the south, which is Negba, that's the line of Chesed. Yitzchak was in the line of severity, like it says. The Yaakov said that the fear of Yitzchak was to me. So in other words, Yitzchak's avodah was fear. Yaakov was in the central line. Tiferes, the level of beauty, because it includes different lines and the combination of both Kavi Yamin and Kavi Shmuel, the right and the left. Therefore, the idea of his chiseling out the sticks over there were multiple colors because there was the dark and the darker shades and the lighter shades. That's what caused the animals to give birth with different spots and so on. The idea of Tiferes, Let's explain at length in the Mamborim on those psukim that speaks about the staff of Yaakov. What's the reason that there was each one was a different type of kav? This one was gvura, this one was chesed, etc. Close, because the general service down here below and fulfilling the entire Torah the way it was prior to the giving of the Torah. When there still was a decree in place that those above should not descend below and those below should not ascend above. It wasn't in such a manner that the one below should be a vessel for it, to be ready for it. How much more so it wasn't in such a manner that they could say about the one below that he's receiving this similar to a way that a vessel receives life. In other words, the tachton did not become a keli. It did not become joined with the hamshachas that came down from above, or the hamshachas that each one of the avos did in their avodah. What's it mean when a keli receives the oir? And when we talk about the relationship between light and a vessel, they become one. Similar to a soul and a body, it becomes one person. The person is not the soul, the person is not the body. There's one entity that's now a soul and a body just together. Same thing when we talk about a kli and an oir, that means that the kli becomes one entirely with the oir. That did not happen here in this world before Matan Torah. So, if that's what means that the avodah of Avram was from this perspective of his neshama. What was his neshama's level? The midah of chesed, kenis chileel. It didn't have to connect with this world. So therefore, he didn't have to do things that fit into the world. He had to do things that were according to his neshama. His neshama was chesed. He did in Yom of chesed. Where do we see that his neshama was chesed? Like brought down Sefer HaBoyer. That the attribute of chesed said before Hashem, from when Avram Avinu was in this world, I did not need to do my work. Because Avram is standing and serving in my place, in my stead. Therefore, his main service was the idea of inviting in, bringing in guests. So too, his service to his maker, between man and Hashem. Was in the way of Avram, my beloved, because his avodah, his idea was chesed. As opposed to Yitzchak, his service to Hashem did not express itself in love, it was in pachad Yitzchak. This means the whole that the way of Avraham Avinu's avodah wasn't the way they was going and traveling in a movement of love, which we said before, love is associated with the south. How did we reach that love? Through meditating in the fact and thinking to the fact that there is a owner to this building, meaning that there's someone running the world. It's explained at length in the Torah and in many places concerning the type of meditation that brings us to the level of love of Avram. And this love of Avraham Avinu affected by him the idea of rushing towards Hashem, until a way of rushing and running without a boundary, nothing, without anything to stop it. So therefore, there had to be a stop. There had to be something to draw him back. Therefore, there had to be the idea of the return. That's the idea of the going and the traveling. That Shari Kadesha to Aliyah's Halich, we're going to see Aliyah Nesefes, So at least mean time in Yonashoiv to be able to have the idea of a going, you can't constantly go. You need to go back and you need to then move forward. So Gam, top of the next page you'd base. So Gam close in the Dachnosus Archim, Benatsula Daf, Ishizo, Shoiv. That's a general idea of inviting him guests. That was something that was done specifically down here below. So therefore, it's an idea of return. So you had the Ratzui was the powerful love that Avraham Avinu had for Hashem. And then the Shoiv was the Hachnasa Soich. Yet all of this had nothing to do really with the world, had nothing to do with the body, had nothing to do with anything in this world becoming a Keli. All of this was according to the level of his neshama. Moving it's understood. It's miles of us from because of the advantage and quality of the others. They are a chariot for Hashem. This is a very uplifted level of service. But still, this is only according to the level and the manner of his service of his neshama. Therefore, the effect was also only concerning the neshama. In other words, this was something that affected and impacted just the neshama. It had nothing to do with the world. As opposed to the effect in the world, we find for the sake of being able to do an oath, then Avraham Avinu had to administer an oath to Eliezer that he's going to take a wife only from his family, for Yitzchak, and an oath needs to be administered by the person making the oath, holding on an object of kedusha. Avraham Avinu had to tell Eliezer, his servant, to place his hand beneath the thigh. Because in the world there was only one thing in existence at that time that was a physical mitzvah. That's the mitzvah of milk that was given to Avraham Avinu as a beginning for the unity of the Elyonim and Tachtonim. In other words, it began the process of where we'd go from this type of joining of the above and below. And as a beginning for the giving of all the mitzvahs. So the breaking through that barrier began with the mitzvah of Milah by Avraham. So to concerning that was primarily soul related. It was internal, it was spiritual. It had nothing to do with the physical world. And so too, following that even though there was learning later on, there was never a stopping of learning and yeshiva. Even Mitzrayim, so even though they had Torah study and therefore they must have some form of mitzvahs as well, but it was again something according to their neshama, something according to their soul, with no impact and no idea having to do with the level of the physical world being impacted and changed by it. Any questions before we learn the next one?
Yeah. A comment, maybe 2 comments. How can you say that hosting those Arabs as guests is not physical? They were real people and they got real food. That's one point. Another point, just a small point. Avram Oavi, the translation is not my Avram beloved. This is Oavi is what Avram has. My lover, not my beloved.
Right, correct. You're right. But as far as the first question is, every single time we do a mitzvah, it needs to also transform the physical world. So even by tzedakah, for example, where let's say the money that's given to tzedakah doesn't become, for example, holy, but as we know that the money that we give to tzedakah elevates both the money that was given and it elevates all the rest of the money that he earned to be able to give to tzedakah. So even though Avraham Avinu was machnis oidach, still in all, that food did not become elevated. Though he did a mitzvah with it at the time, there was no enduring elevation that happened either to that food or to the rest of the money that he kept at home because he shared from it with the earth. That's where it would be in that regard by the mitzvah of Achnasas Orchim, where we'd see about the impact on the world. So true, he gave the guests food, but it's just to give an example, a similar example, though it's not exactly the same. The Alter Rebbe says in Tanya that if a person eats non-kosher food and he didn't know that it was non-kosher, and he ate Shem Shemayim and he made a bracha, and he afterwards used the koyach of that food to daven and to learn, still in all, since the food is treif, whatever good intentions he had, whatever mistake he made, etc., that food is not elevated. So true, it gave him energy, he davened with that energy, but the food itself never became elevated. The same thing in this case, because of this type of the division between the physical and the spiritual, it's all fine and good. Avraham Avinu did his avodah of shuv by being machnas oich, but nothing in the physical world, neither the food, neither the money that he had, etc., became elevated and transformed through his being machnas oich. Make sense? I'll take that as a yes.
It's
Okay.
not simple. Not.
What, Dr. Rabbi?
I'm just saying it's not simple.
I'm not saying it's simple. Nothing is supposed to be simple. If it was simple.
Because
Yes,
in reality, he gave them physical stuff.
Right. And the same thing, a person that eats not kosher food, l'shem shemayim, and he had no idea that was not kosher, he ate physical stuff. And he ate that physical stuff, and it gave him physical energy to be able to do his avodas Hashem afterwards. And still no, the Rebbe explains in a letter how, despite that, it is, that's why it's called Asur. It's bound up in Klitva and Sitra Achra, and it can't be elevated. In a similar vein, before Matan Torah, nothing could be elevated. In other words, just like we understand now that things that are Asur cannot be elevated, the same thing before Matan Torah. The Rebbe explains in a letter where he explains that part of Tanya, he explains a very geschmack of art. He says that the whole idea of elevation is a chid. Elevating the physical to the spiritual is a chid.
Yeah.
And therefore, only those things that Torah said elevation can take place will take place. Things that are asur, they cannot be elevated. The same in this case, this is before the giving of the Torah. So everything was like in that type of stage. There was no possibility for it to become elevated. Despite
so nothing
was
missing. Nothing was missing from Avram's side. He did what he
did.
But the rules of the games were
correct.
Okay.
You're right. But that's the idea of the Gzeira.
Yeah. I understand.
Someone else had a question over there?
Yeah, so in Avram's case, he was elevating the godly soul, but had no effect whatsoever on the animal soul. So,
on the animal soul, on the body, on the world.
but he did elevate the godly soul, right?
Yeah, the godly soul got its nourishment, if you will, got its spiritual connection and so on. Okay, let's continue. Line 17, page Yud base. Pratis Yoiser, more specifically, he began Avodas Avram b'kiyum Torah, also the Avodah Avram. Filling of the Torah, the Vadai Polagam ba'olam surely affected also in the world. After all of that, but the effect in the world is not the type of effect that we're speaking about after Matan Torah. Moving on, Maimon Azalek understood what the Chazal say, Avram, until Avram Avinu came along. That's the expression in Chazal, that the world was running in darkness. And when Avram came along, so then all of a sudden the world was illuminated. But again, not in the way of oil v'kli that they become joined. Though also prior to the service of Avram was the idea of Torah, which is called the Torah of light. Like we said, that preceded the world. And how much more so when the world was created through Torah, that the Torah, we said, is like plans and blueprints for the creation of the world. Despite all of that, we call the world was running in darkness. That means that the light of Torah did not illuminate the darkness in the world. Even not temporarily. That was before Avram. That was the uniqueness of what happened through Avram. Moshe calls, like it says, top of page Gimel, called out over there in the name of Hashem, God world. Do not read, he called out, but he made others call. Paul, through his avoid, he affected. During the time of his avodah, this is crucial. At the time when he did his avodah, the world proclaimed, the world cried out, God and world. Not the God of the world, that the world is one thing with God. By days and through his avodah, his battle mashahoya olam isnaig ba'fela, it ceased the fact that the world was running in darkness. Avol, but this is still before Matan Torah. Avol became in this concept did not yet permeate the physicality of the world. Until it didn't even permeate the body of the person doing the service. That changed completely. Even though the others are the divine chariot, so if it's a chariot, so that means we're talking about the body. Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, what does it mean when it says that the others were Merkava to the Eibishter? That means their physical body was a divine chariot. Because the Alter Rebbe over there in Tanya speaks about the different ways of union that happens through mitzvahs. The way Nefesh Elokis is united with the Eibishter through mitzvahs, the way Nefesh Bahamis is united with the Eibishter through mitzvahs. The body's union with the Eibishter is in the way of a chariot. So we're calling Avram Avinu and all the others, we're calling a chariot today. So how they move us, so it's understood. Also their physical brain was in the way of a chariot. And this is similar to the soul and the body. It's not quite if we see the Parakim in Tanya, but it's in general, it bears a certain similarity. That when the neshama does its avodah and it becomes elevated while being in the body, also becomes a change in the body. But that is the limitation of the time before Matan Torah, that's only at the time that the person is doing the mitzvah. Though afterwards the body can remain in its original state and situation, but and not to change the way a physical thing becomes changed after a mitzvah was performed in it. After Matan Torah, that then when the physical object is performed within a mitzvah after Matan Torah, so then it now becomes a holy object. But Avram Avinu, his body, at the time that he was a Merkava, so that was the revelation of godliness in the body. Now the truth is, that it's constant. Avram Avinu was, the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, the Avos being a Merkava was always in constant. But again, it was just like an impact from above to below. It wasn't that the change took over the body, that the body left its own devices, was now a changed body. Any questions before we go on to Isaiah? So it goes on to Isaiah, line 20. That's the uniqueness and the ufta of Matan Torah. After the prefacing of the iron furnace of Mitzrayim. Paul would affect the refinement in the general world. And how much more so it affected the refinement of those that were the receivers of the Torah. How does it affect in the people and in the world? A refinement, I avoid the kasha through difficult work, avoid this perach, breaking work, with mortar and bricks. This affected to nullify the decree. And now, as opposed to beforehand, those above can descend below, and those below can ascend above. And then they began to do. Then began drawing down and descent of the Torah in actual action. Also in the body, and the physicality and the material coarseness of the world. But so they should be able to be this idea. That's a joining of two opposite things, the spiritual and the physical. For this had to be a great revelation and a way of an inspiration from above. That had to be by Matan Torah that took place, that broke through that barrier. Therefore, in every speech that the Eibishter said by Matan Torah, their souls flew out of their bodies because that was such a powerful revelation from above. He's emphasizing the whole time. This is the beginning to affect and permeate also the body. But to know of the master that also the body should be in such a movement state situation. That's the idea of self-sacrifice, which took place by Matan Torah, that their souls flew out of the body, which is similar to the idea of self-sacrifice. But it was only an initial beginning of it. Matan Torah, the souls flying out of the body, the mysterious nefesh, was only as a result of the inspiration from above. Not because of the choice and their will, but because of their service down there below. This is what Chazal said. During Matan Torah, Hashem turned over a mountain over them like a barrel. Still, because of this, the Chazal say that from here is a great protest for the Torah, that the people that didn't complain and say we were coerced in accepting the Torah, and therefore the sale is not a legal sale, as the idea of Meidah applies in Halach. Isa Lashon, like it's brought down the language in Shazel, for example, it's, for example, a person that's surrounded and grasped within a barrel that's surrounding him, and encircles him from every side, without being able to move and go out of it. The same thing, this was that was like not in my control of what I could do anything about it. In addition to being a problem that was only inspiration from above, even the inspiration from above was only a beginning concerning the effect on the body. Now we could say what took place by McGill's Esther time. This is the uniqueness that came about during the times of Achashverosh. They fulfilled what they accepted earlier. Not that they had it like they had then because he turned over a mountain over them like a barrel. They reached this type of mysterious nefesh out of the avoided down here below, not in imposed upon them from above.